Captain Teo stood at the observation deck of the Coalition station, watching Earth spin below him like a blue marble suspended in the darkness of space. It had been only 3 months since humanity officially joined the Galactic Coalition, and already the weight of their new position was crushing down on his shoulders. The view that should have filled him with pride instead made him feel trapped, like watching a caged bird realize the door has locked behind it. The voice came from behind him, calm and measured, the way Director Min-Soo always spoke when he wanted to say something difficult. Beautiful, isn't it? Our world. From up here you can almost forget about the restrictions. Teo turned to face his superior officer. Min-Soo was a tall man with gray threading through his hair, someone who had spent his entire career climbing the political ladder. Where Teo was all military straightness and tension, Min-Soo had learned to move through rooms with the ease of someone who understood that compromise was sometimes the price of survival. "I can't forget about them, Director," Teo said quietly. "None of us can. They've made sure of that." Min-Soo nodded, moving to stand beside Teo at the window. In the reflection of the glass, the director's face showed signs of stress, lines deeper than they had been a month ago, eyes that looked like they hadn't seen enough sleep. "The Coalition Council reviewed our defense proposal again today," he said. "They rejected it. Again." This was what Teo had feared since the moment he saw the restriction printed in the Coalition Charter. No newly inducted species could build military warships for 100 years. The Council claimed it was a safety measure, a way to ensure that young civilizations didn't destabilize the careful peace that had been built across the galaxy over thousands of years. But Teo saw it for what it really was, a way to keep humanity weak, to keep them dependent on the Coalition's protection, to make sure they never became a threat. "They're right that it's too aggressive," Min-Soo continued, as if reading Teo's thoughts. "We knew they would reject it. We knew they would reject anything we proposed that looks like military buildup. The Coalition needs us to be grateful, not ambitious." Before Teo could respond, an alarm sounded somewhere in the station. It was a different sound from the regular maintenance alerts, sharper, more urgent. Within minutes, Minister Jiho appeared on the observation deck, his official uniform already wrinkled from hurrying through the corridors. "We have a situation," Jiho said, breathing hard. "The frontier colony at Kepler 442 is under attack. Carillion raiders. They hit the settlement before the local defense satellites could even activate." The color drained from Min-Soo's face. The Carillion Empire had always been unpredictable, always been on the edge of Coalition space, but attacks on human settlements had been rare until recently. In the last month there had been 3 incidents. Each one had been dismissed by the Coalition as a misunderstanding, a border dispute that would resolve itself. "How many casualties?" Teo asked. "Still counting," Jiho said, "but initial reports suggest over 200 dead. Mostly civilians." The words hung in the air like poison. 200 people. 200 human lives ended because the Carillions felt like attacking, and because humanity had no real way to defend itself. The Coalition military was massive, powerful, and slow. A response fleet would take weeks to reach the frontier, and by then the Carillions would be long gone. "I'm calling an emergency session of the Coalition Council," Min-Soo said. "We need to demand military support, faster response times." We need teeth," Teo interrupted, then caught himself. "Forgive me, Director." I spoke out of turn, but Min-Soo didn't correct him. Instead, the Director looked at him with something that might have been understanding. "I know what you think, Captain." "I think it too. But we can't say it out loud, not yet. The Coalition would hear it as aggression, as proof that humanity can't be trusted. We have to work within the system." It was the same answer Min-Soo always gave, the same compromise that had kept him alive and in power for so long. But as Teo looked back at Earth through the window, he wondered how many more colonies would have to burn before working within the system finally worked. Later that day, Teo received a message from Jiwoo. She was one of the best engineers in the Earth Defense Ministry, someone he had worked with for 5 years. The message was short. "We need to talk private, not the station. Come to the old research facility at Dock 7. Alone." It was against protocol. It was risky. But Teo went anyway. He found Jiwoo in one of the abandoned sections of the station, an old laboratory that had been scheduled for decommissioning since before the Coalition agreement. She looked different somehow, more focused, more angry than he had ever seen her. "They took me off the weapons development program," she said without preamble. transferred me to civilian applications. The Coalition said my expertise was too dangerous for a young species to possess. I'm sorry, Teo said, though the words felt empty. Don't be sorry, Jiwoo snapped. Be angry. 200 people died today, Teo. 200 of us. And the Coalition will eventually send a fleet to respond. And they'll protect themselves, and the Carillions will retreat, and they'll claim victory. But they won't change anything. They won't let us protect ourselves. They won't let us build the ships we need to survive. What are you saying? Teo asked, though he thought he already knew. Jiwoo looked him directly in the eye. I'm saying that maybe there's another way. I'm saying that maybe we don't have to ask permission. I'm saying that I know people, good people, smart people, who think like I do. And I think you do too. The weight of those words, the implication of them, hung between them. Teo understood that she was offering him something dangerous, something that could end his career and his freedom if discovered. He also understood that he was going to say yes before she even finished speaking. Tell me more, he said finally. Jiwoo smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Teo felt something other than despair. He felt hope. He felt rebellion. He felt alive. That night, as news of the Kepler 442 attack spread across human settlements, Director Min-soo sat in the Coalition Assembly Hall and listened to the other council members debate what response would be appropriate. Their words were careful and measured, their concerns about protocol and precedent and the long-term stability of the alliance. And Teo, watching from the military observers section, made his decision. Humanity had followed the rules. Humanity had been grateful for Coalition membership. Humanity had accepted restrictions that no other species had accepted, and humanity was dying for it. That was about to change. Whether the Coalition approved or not, whether they liked it or not, humanity was going to take control of its own destiny. The Invincible was going to be built, and everything would change. The asteroid was unremarkable, one of millions in the Kepler system that orbited without purpose or name. It had been selected not for its beauty or its unique properties, but for one simple reason. Nobody would ever think to look there. On the surface, an outpost had been built that bore the official markings of a mining operation. Drilling equipment, processing facilities, and equipment pods all sat in carefully arranged patterns that matched hundreds of other similar facilities scattered throughout the system. Coalition inspectors who made rare visits to the area saw exactly what they were supposed to see. Hard-working humans extracting valuable minerals to fulfill their resource obligations to the Coalition. What they did not see was what lay beneath the surface. Deep inside the asteroid, carved out through months of careful work, was a hidden construction facility. And inside that facility, the Invincible was taking shape. Jiwoo moved through the main construction bay with a tablet in her hand, checking specifications and measurements. Around her, a team of 30 engineers worked on different sections of the massive ship. It was smaller than the Coalition's warships, certainly. Only 300 meters long compared to the kilometers-long battlecruisers that dominated alien space fleets. But every centimeter had been designed with purpose. Every system had been optimized for maximum efficiency. The hull material was something that human engineers had developed through careful experimentation and study of materials captured from damaged Coalition ships. They called it adaptive armor, a quantum layer composite that could learn from enemy attacks and adjust its molecular structure to better absorb similar impacts in the future. It was not something the Coalition had ever shared with humanity. It was something humans had figured out by accident while trying to understand why some alien structures could withstand incredible punishment. Section 4 is complete, one of the senior engineers, a man named Hoseok, reported as Jiwoo approached. Quantum matrix is stable. Shield generators are ready for integration. Jiwoo nodded, making notes on her tablet. Good, what about the propulsion systems? Still working on it, Hoseok admitted. We're trying to adapt the racing engine designs like you suggested, but scaling up from vehicles to a warship is creating some unexpected problems. The energy distribution isn't balanced. We might be exceeding safe operational parameters. Show me, Jiwoo said. As Hoseok walked her through the propulsion bay, Jiwoo's mind was already working through the problem. She had always believed that the best solutions came from understanding how nature worked at its simplest level. Racing engines worked because they were built to push systems to their absolute limits while maintaining perfect control. Apply that same principle to a spacecraft, and you could theoretically achieve speeds that seemed impossible for a ship of this size. But it was one thing to theorize about it in a laboratory. It was another thing to actually make it work. Try reducing the intake flow by 8%, Jiwoo suggested, and let's add secondary stabilizers to the secondary system. The power won't spike if we distribute the load more evenly. Hoseok typed commands into the system, and the simulation on the screen shifted. The energy distribution smoothed out, the stress indicators dropping back into acceptable ranges. That works, he said with visible relief. That actually works. Everything will work, Jiwoo said quietly. Because it has to. 3 years. 3 years of secret work, of hidden resources, of lies told to the Coalition about production numbers and facility purposes. 3 years of knowing that discovery would mean imprisonment, trial, and likely execution under Coalition law. The penalty for building a warship was not something the Coalition took lightly, but there had never been a choice about starting the work. There had only been the question of whether they had the courage to continue. Back at Earth, Director Min-soo was managing his own difficult tasks. He had to maintain his position within the Coalition government, while secretly diverting resources and personnel to the asteroid project. He had to make decisions about which engineers to recruit, which workers to trust, which government contracts could be subtly rerouted to fuel the hidden construction effort. Captain Teo was recruiting military personnel, carefully selecting pilots and soldiers who had either lost loved ones to Carillion attacks or who harbored deep doubts about the Coalition's ability to protect humanity. Among his recruits was Nari, a pilot whose family had been killed in the Kepler 442 attack. She volunteered for the project without hesitation, without asking questions about legality or consequences. "I just want a chance to fight back," she said simply, when Teo brought her into the project. "I don't want to wait for the Coalition to eventually do something. I want to actually do something." Teo also brought in Sung-ho, a tactical officer who had spent years studying Carillion military patterns and who believed he had identified critical weaknesses in their approach. "They're aggressive," Sung-ho explained, spreading holographic maps across a secure terminal. "But they're predictable in that aggression. They assume their larger ships and higher firepower will always overwhelm opponents. They don't account for maneuverability, for adaptation, for the kind of creative thinking that smaller, more desperate forces develop." It was exactly what Teo needed to hear. It was exactly the kind of thinking that might make the Invincible more than just a dream. Dr. Haejun joined the project to develop Aurora, an artificial intelligence system for the Invincible's targeting and combat systems. The Coalition had strict rules about what kind of AI technology young species could possess, but Haejun worked in the shadows, developing something more advanced than anything humans were officially allowed to have. Aurora could process tactical information millions of times per second, could predict enemy movements based on pattern analysis, could adapt strategies in real time as battle conditions changed. Then there was Mingyu, a computer specialist whose job was to keep the entire project invisible to Coalition sensors and inspections. He created false data trails, intercepted inspection records, and built encryption systems that made the hidden facility completely undetectable to outside surveillance. His work was as critical to the project's survival as any physical component being built. Meanwhile, the Carillion attacks continued. More colonies fell. The frontier worlds cried out for protection that never came fast enough. Each attack reinforced the decision to build the Invincible. Each loss of human life became part of the fuel that drove the project forward. Jiwoo found herself working for weeks at a time without proper sleep, sustained only by coffee and the knowledge that every system she perfected, every problem she solved might be the difference between human survival and human extinction. The armor learning systems, the modular weapon configurations, the navigation computers that could plot courses through hazardous space faster than any Coalition ship could manage. All of it represented years of human innovation, stolen from Coalition designs and reimagined through a desperate human lens. Then came the close call that nearly ended everything. Coalition inspectors arrived at the mining facility unannounced, and they were more thorough than they had been on previous visits. They wanted to understand why production numbers had been so inconsistent. They wanted to see the deep storage facilities. They wanted answers. Mingyu and his team worked frantically, flooding false data into every system. creating virtual tours that would show exactly what the inspectors expected to see. Jiwoo and her team froze, holding their breath as Coalition sensors swept across the facility. For 3 hours that felt like 3 days, human engineers watched the readings, waiting for the moment when the inspectors would discover the hidden construction bay. But they never did. The false data held. The encryption held. The inspectors saw nothing unusual, asked a few questions about production delays, accepted reasonable answers, and left. After that close call, work accelerated dramatically. The facility pushed to dangerous levels of productivity. Shifts extended from 16 hours to 18 hours. Workers rotated through almost constantly, with new personnel arriving on supposedly random supply shipments from Earth. Every day brought the Invincible closer to completion. But every day also brought new risk of discovery. Then after 6 months of this accelerated work, after a final push that tested every person involved to the absolute edge of what they could physically endure, it was finally done. The Invincible stood in the construction bay complete. 300 meters of human defiance against the rules that had tried to chain them. Adaptive armor gleamed with quantum radiance. Weapon systems were fully armed and tested. Engines hummed with the potential for speed that no Coalition warship could match. Aurora was online, its consciousness distributed through every system, waiting for the moment it would first taste combat. Jiwoo stood before the finished ship, exhaustion and triumph warring in her expression. Around her, the team stood in awed silence. They had done it. Against impossible odds, against Coalition restrictions, against the weight of the known galaxy's disapproval, they had built something extraordinary. "Get some rest," Teo said, coming to stand beside her. "Tomorrow we change everything." The energy signature was impossible to hide once the Invincible left the asteroid. The ship's engines, designed for incredible speed and power, produced an energy output that was unlike anything Coalition sensors had ever detected from a human source. Within hours of the ship's departure, alerts began sounding across the Coalition monitoring stations. Director Min-soo received the news while sitting in his official office on Earth, reviewing colony reports that showed increasing Carillion activity. His secretary rushed in, face pale, and told him that Coalition inspectors were requesting an immediate meeting. Min-soo knew at that moment that the secret was over. The question now was whether humanity would survive the revelation. He traveled to the Coalition station, where he was led into a conference room dominated by a massive holographic display. The room was full of Coalition representatives from a dozen different species, their appearance ranging from humanoid to completely alien. They all turned to stare at him with expressions that ranged from curious to openly hostile. "Director Min-soo," said Counselor Veth, a tall alien creature with crystalline skin and multiple optical organs. "We have detected an energy signature of unknown origin emanating from the Kepler system. It appears to be a large spacecraft of unusual design, one that matches no known Coalition vessel template. Can you explain this?" Min-soo had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. He had prepared speeches, practiced his tone, and thought about every possible response. But now that the moment had actually arrived, all of that preparation felt meaningless. He straightened his shoulders and spoke calmly and clearly. "That ship is called the Invincible. It is a warship built by the human species. I authorized its construction. The entire human government backs this decision completely." The room erupted. Representatives shouted accusations and questions in a dozen different languages. Coalition protocols demanded that Min-soo be arrested immediately pending a formal investigation. Other representatives demanded that the Invincible be destroyed, and demanded that humanity face severe consequences for this violation of the Coalition Charter. But through all the chaos, Min-soo kept talking. He spoke about the Carillion attacks. He spoke about colonies burning and people dying. He spoke about the Coalition's inability to respond quickly enough to protect its members. He spoke about a government that had made rules that kept some species weak and dependent, while stronger species maintained their dominance. "You say we are children," Min-soo said, his voice rising above the noise. "Children who must be protected from ourselves. But children die, Counselor Veth. Human children die because your system does not protect us. We built this ship not to attack the Coalition. We built it to defend ourselves when the Coalition could not or would not. We broke your laws because your laws were killing us." There was a moment of silence. Into that silence stepped Ambassador Jiho, Earth's chief diplomat to the coalition. He was a woman of perhaps 60 years, with silver in her hair and decades of experience negotiating with alien species. The human government formally requests that this matter be reviewed through proper coalition legal channels, she said, her voice steady and controlled. We have a defense to present. We have justifications and explanations. We request the right to have our case heard before any punitive actions are taken. The coalition rules required that all parties be given the chance to present their case. It was one of the few pieces of coalition law that worked in humanity's favor now. But as Jimho spoke, she was also working behind the scenes, meeting with various council members, presenting evidence of the Carillion Empire's treaty violations, showing data about the Carillion attacks on coalition worlds that had been conveniently minimized in official reports. What she was trying to do was buying time. Time for events to move in humanity's favor. But the Carillion Empire was not a patient species. They saw the Invincible as a direct threat to their own position within the coalition and galactic politics. Their response was swift and brutal. The Carillion ambassador, a being called Kevlar with a body that seemed to be made of shifting sand, stood and made an ultimatum to the coalition council. If you allow this violation to stand, Kevlar said, his voice like grinding stone, if you permit this young, dangerous species to retain this illegal warship, then the Carillion Empire will withdraw from the coalition effective immediately. We will declare this alliance dissolved to human participation. We will treat any human outside our borders as a hostile entity. It was the threat of war. It was the threat of the coalition fracturing. The council fell silent, understanding the terrible position they were in. They could not allow humans to break the law without consequences, but if they punished humanity, they risked losing the Carillion Empire and potentially the entire alliance structure that had maintained peace across the galaxy for millennia. They were trapped, and the Carillions knew it. We will need time to discuss this, Counselor Veth said finally. This situation is unprecedented. All parties are ordered to remain available for further questioning. No warships are to leave the system without permission. This session is adjourned. Minsu left the chamber and contacted Teo immediately. Hold position, he said, knowing the call was being monitored but not caring anymore. Do not engage. Do not take any action. They're trying to figure out what to do. But even as Minsu spoke those words, even as the Coalition Council convened in private sessions to debate the impossible situation they now faced, events were moving in directions that no one could fully control. The Carillion Empire, sensing that the political situation was unstable, made a decision that would change everything. They launched an attack on one of the Coalition's largest mining stations. The attack was overwhelming and devastating. The station was destroyed. Thousands of workers, many of them Coalition citizens from multiple species, were killed. It was not a calculated military move. It was a display of power, a demonstration of what the Carillions would do if the Coalition did not bend to their will. The Coalition's response was immediate and unexpected. In their anger at this attack, the Council made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours before. They authorized the Invincible to engage the Carillion forces. It was an unofficial authorization, the kind of thing that would never appear in any official Coalition records. But it was an authorization nonetheless. Captain Teo received coordinates and target information. The Invincible was given permission to fight. Minsu received confirmation of this decision in a secure message from Counselor Veth. Go. Show us what you have built. Show us if your violations were worth the price you will pay. The message could have meant many things, but Teo interpreted it simply. Humans were finally being given their chance to prove themselves. Teo gathered his crew. Nari performed final checks on the ship's engines. Sung-Ho reviewed tactical data about the Carillion fleet composition. Jiwoo ran diagnostics on every system, her fingers moving rapidly across control panels, checking and rechecking everything, and then, with the weight of an entire species on their shoulders, they prepared to fly into battle. Aurora's voice came over the communication system, calm and controlled, speaking with the careful precision of an artificial intelligence that had been built for exactly this moment. Captain Teo, all systems are optimal. We are ready for engagement. Shall I plot a course to the Carillion position? Teo looked at his crew. He saw fear in some faces, determination in others. He saw humans who were willing to die for the chance to fight for their own people. Plot the course, he said. And Aurora? Today we make history. The Invincible's engines roared to life and humanity's impossible warship accelerated toward destiny. The Carillion blockade fleet consisted of 7 capital-class warships, each one the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons arrays that had been designed and perfected through hundreds of years of warfare. Behind them were dozens of smaller attack vessels. The Carillions had not expected serious resistance. They had not expected the coalition to have the courage to challenge them militarily. They definitely had not expected a single human ship. When Captain Teo received the first visual of the Carillion fleet on his tactical display, he understood on a visceral level what they were facing. The Carillion ships were massive, powerful, and intimidating. The Invincible, by comparison, looked like a fighter jet facing off against aircraft carriers. "Open a communication channel," Teo ordered. "Standard coalition greeting. Let them know we are here." Nari, sitting at the pilot controls of the Invincible, felt her hands shake as she guided the ship forward. She had flown combat simulations hundreds of times. She had trained under elite coalition pilots, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the moment when actual enemy warships came into visual range and began powering up their weapon systems. "They're not responding to the hail," Communications Officer Mingyu reported. They're moving to intercept. They're treating us like a hostile." "They are correct." Aurora's voice came smoothly through the communication system. "We are hostiles. Recommend immediate evasive maneuvers." The first volley of fire erupted from the Carillion fleet like a volcanic explosion. Thousands of high-energy weapons discharged simultaneously. A storm of destruction that would have annihilated any conventional spacecraft instantly. The Invincible's adaptive armor did something that nothing in the Carillion tactical database had accounted for. Instead of simply absorbing or deflecting the energy, the armor began to learn. Each impact was analyzed in microseconds. Each energy signature was cataloged and studied. And with each attack, the armor adjusted its molecular structure, becoming increasingly resistant to the specific frequencies being used against it. The ship bucked and rolled under the assault, but it held. It survived. "Evasive pattern Delta," Nari commanded herself, her training overriding her fear. Her hands moved across the flight controls with practiced precision. The Invincible accelerated with a grace that seemed impossible for such a massive vessel, diving into a field of asteroids that surrounded the Carillion position. The Carillion ships, massive and powerful but designed for open space combat, could not follow into such a tight formation. They were too large, too inflexible. But the Invincible wove through the asteroids like water, its engines pushing it to speeds that should have torn the ship apart but didn't, because Jiwoo's team had engineered every system to handle exactly this kind of punishment. "Firing pattern Alpha," Sung-Ho commanded from the tactical station. His voice was calm, focused, the voice of a warrior who had trained his entire life for a moment exactly like this. The Invincible's modular weapon systems came to life. They were smaller than the Carillion weapons, less powerful individually, but they were smarter. Each shot was guided by Aurora's calculations, aimed at specific points in the Carillion shield frequencies that Sung-Ho had identified through months of analysis. The attacks were not designed to destroy immediately. They were designed to penetrate, to find weaknesses, to create opportunities. The first Carillion warship's shields flickered and failed. The Invincible's weapons struck true, boring into the hull of the massive vessel. Emergency systems activated on the Carillion ship, fire erupting from the impact points, the warship beginning to lose power and control. The Carillions had expected easy victory. What they received instead was shock and confusion. "Second target," Sung-Ho commanded. Same engagement pattern. "Attack their left flank shield emitter." Nari was already moving the Invincible into position. The smaller ship darted around the Carillion fleet like a wolf circling much larger prey. It was not just her exceptional piloting skills that made this possible. It was the combination of every advantage the Invincible possessed: speed, maneuverability, adaptive armor that grew stronger with each attack, and an AI intelligence that could calculate optimal firing solutions millions of times per second. On the Invincible's bridge, Teo watched the tactical display with a sense of unreality. This was actually working. This impossible dream of a ship was actually defeating a Carillion battle group. "Damage report," he said. "Minor hull damage across sectors 4 and 7, reported the engineering officer. "Adaptive armor is holding." absorbing incoming fire and learning. Each successive volley from the Corellians is doing less damage than the previous one. It is exactly as engineer Jiwoo predicted it would function. Jiwoo, watching from the engineering station, felt tears beginning to form. Everything she had built, every impossible innovation, every moment of desperate work, was proving itself in real combat. The adaptive armor was actually learning faster than the Corellians could adapt their strategy. Third target, Sung-ho called out. Full engagement sequence. Another Corellian warship found its shields overwhelmed. The Invincible moved like a predator, efficient and precise. This was not how space combat was supposed to work according to Coalition doctrine. Coalition warships fought in formation, relied on numbers and overwhelming firepower. They did not weave through asteroids at impossible speeds while their weapon systems adapted to enemy tactics in real time. But the Invincible was not fighting according to Coalition doctrine. It was fighting according to human desperation and human innovation. The battle lasted 3 hours, though to everyone aboard the Invincible it felt like both an instant and an eternity. When it was over, 3 Corellian capital warships had been disabled, their systems damaged beyond the point where they could maintain combat effectiveness. The remaining Corellian vessels began retreating, their commanders unable to understand what had just happened. The Invincible had defeated a Corellian blockade fleet, but victory carried a price. The ship had taken significant damage. One weapon system had been completely destroyed. The starboard side of the hull showed scars from impacts that had burned through multiple layers of armor. The adaptive armor had held, but it had been pushed to its absolute limits. Jiwoo's team worked frantically in the engineering section, trying to stabilize critical systems. 3 engineers were injured in a plasma discharge that erupted from a damaged conduit. The medical team moved quickly, treating wounds and keeping everyone functional. Can we make it back to the asteroid? Tayo asked Jiwoo on a direct communication line. There was a moment of silence before she responded. Slowly. If we push the engines, we risk catastrophic failure. But we can make it. The Invincible is hurt, but it is not broken. 3 Coalition support vessels that had maintained distance during the battle now moved forward, confirming the Corellian retreat and documenting the victory. Their officers communicated with Tayo, their messages containing a mix of congratulation and shock. That was extraordinary, one Coalition captain said. We have never seen anything like what you just did. You fought an entire Corellian battle group using tactics that are not in any Coalition military manual. That is because we are human. Tayo replied simply. We do not have thousands of years of military tradition telling us what is impossible. We just do what is necessary. As the Invincible limped back toward the asteroid facility, the news of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The human ship that should not exist had fought and defeated a Corellian warship squadron, a species that the Coalition had deemed too young and too dangerous to be trusted with military technology, had just proven they were neither young nor incompetent. They had proven that humanity could fight. They had proven that humanity could win. On Earth, humans gathered in plazas and parks to watch the news feeds. They celebrated, they wept. They finally understood that their future was not going to be dictated by the restrictions and rules of the Coalition. Their future was going to be determined by their own ability, their own courage, and their own refusal to be bound by the limitations that others tried to impose on them. The Invincible had risen, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Coalition Council chamber had never seen a gathering quite like this. Representatives from every major species sat in their designated positions, watching as human delegates entered with the confidence of equals rather than supplicants. The balance of power in the room had fundamentally shifted, and everyone present understood it. Councillor Veth stood to call the session to order, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights as he moved. Around him, the other council members settled into their seats, waiting for the formal proceedings to begin. We are gathered to discuss the unauthorized military actions taken by the human species, Veth began, and to determine what consequences and what legal framework will govern human activities going forward. Director Minsu stood. He was no longer looking at the council from a position of defensiveness or fear. He was standing as a representative of a species that had just proven itself in combat. The human government understands that our actions violated the Coalition Charter, Minsu said. We do not deny this. We do not ask for forgiveness or mercy. What we offer instead is a simple truth. The restriction placed on humans was unjust. It kept us vulnerable. It cost us lives. And we chose to protect ourselves rather than watch our people die. Ambassador Jiho took her turn speaking, presenting evidence of coalition protection failures, of Carillion treaty violations that had been minimized in official reports, of a system that had been designed to keep young species dependent and weak. Humanity is not asking to change the past, Jiho said. We are asking to change the future. We are asking for the right to build the military force necessary to protect our people. We are asking for the coalition to acknowledge that a rule that keeps species weak and dependent is not a rule that serves justice. It serves only the interests of those already in power. The debate that followed lasted days. Some council members argued that humanity must be punished severely to maintain the authority of coalition law. Others argued that the punishment should be light because humanity's violations had exposed weaknesses in the coalition's defense structure. Still others argued that humanity had done what any species would do when facing extinction. They had fought for survival, but the argument changed, fundamentally when the Carillion Empire made its final miscalculation. The Carillions, seeing the coalition's indecision as an opportunity, attacked again. This time they targeted a coalition research station that housed scientific materials from a dozen different species. The attack was designed to damage the coalition's technological infrastructure and to demonstrate the Carillions' power. What the Carillions did not account for was that the attack would be witnessed by multiple coalition observers, that it would be recorded and verified, and that it would force the Coalition Council to finally act decisively. The response was swift. The Coalition authorized a full military response to the Carillion aggression, and more significantly, the Coalition formally rescinded the 100-year restriction on human military development. Instead of punishment, humanity received something far more valuable: official recognition as a military power within the Coalition. The new law was simple and clear. Humans could build warships. Humans could develop their own military technology. Humans could protect themselves without asking permission. There was one other significant change. The Carillion Empire, exposed as a violator of coalition peace, faced severe consequences. Their military was restricted. Their colonial territories were placed under additional oversight. Several of their government leaders were arrested and tried for war crimes. The Carillion threat, which had seemed so overwhelming just months before, was suddenly diminished. Director Minsu called an address to the human people from Earth's primary communication hub. His message was transmitted to every human colony, every human settlement, every human heart that had despaired of ever being more than a protected but powerless member of the galactic community. We have proven that humans are not children, Minsu said, his voice steady and clear. We have proven that we are not weak. We have proven that when we are pushed into a corner, when we are told we cannot survive, we find a way to not just survive, but to triumph. Today, the Coalition formally recognizes humanity as an equal power. Today we claim our place among the stars not as subjects but as sovereigns of our own destiny. The celebration that followed was unlike anything humanity had experienced since joining the Coalition. On Earth, on the frontier colonies, on orbital stations throughout human space, people gathered to watch the Invincible as it returned home. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere with a grace that belied the damage it carried. Its hull was scarred from battle, its weapon systems partially destroyed, its engines running at well below optimal capacity. But it had never looked more beautiful. It was a ship built by human hands, a symbol of human defiance, a proof that humanity could not be contained or controlled by the rules of others. Captain Teo stood on the observation deck as the ship approached Earth's primary spaceport. He thought about the journey from the moment he had watched Earth from the observation window on the Coalition station, feeling trapped and powerless, to this moment of triumph and vindication. It had been an impossible journey, and yet here they were. Nari, the pilot who had flown the Invincible through asteroid fields and around Carillion warships, pushed a strand of hair from her face and smiled. She had avenged her family. She had fought for her people. She had done what humans had not been allowed to do. And she had lived to tell about it. 3 months after the Invincible's return, work began on the next generation of human warships. The original facility on the asteroid was officially recognized and expanded with Coalition support. New shipyards were built on the Moon and in orbital stations around Earth. Human engineers who had been relegated to civilian projects were given resources and authority to develop new weapon systems, new defensive technologies, new innovations. Jiwoo stood in her new office overlooking the largest construction facility ever built by humans. Multiple ships were under construction, each one based on the Invincible's core design but incorporating improvements that months of combat experience had taught them. Captain Teo visited her on a quiet afternoon. Bringing with him Nari and Sung-ho, they stood together, looking at the construction bays, watching as human workers moved through the facilities with the confidence of a species that had finally claimed its own future. The Carillions are already rebuilding their fleet, Sung-ho said quietly. Intelligence suggests they will come for us again eventually. Then so will we, Teo replied. His voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute certainty. We will build bigger ships, better ships, faster ships. We will build a military that ensures no species ever underestimates humanity again. Nari looked at the construction bay and smiled. This time, they won't be fighting against restrictions and impossible odds. This time, they'll be fighting against humanity that has nothing to lose and everything to prove. Jiwoo turned away from the window and looked at her friends. She saw in them everything that had driven the project forward from the beginning. The determination to survive, the refusal to accept limitations, the fundamental human characteristic of looking at an impossible situation and deciding to try anyway. The Invincible was just the beginning, Jiwoo said. What we build next will be even more extraordinary. The galaxy told us we were not allowed to build warships. The galaxy told us we were too young, too dangerous, too unpredictable, but we built them anyway, and now everything is going to change. She walked back to her design terminal and began pulling up specifications for the next ship class. Her fingers moved across the controls with the muscle memory of someone who had dedicated years to this work. The designs began to take shape on the screen, sleeker than the Invincible, faster, with weapon systems that represented the next generation of human innovation. Behind her, Teo, Nari, and Sung-ho watched, understanding that they were witnessing the birth of something fundamental. Not just a new military capability, but a new humanity. A humanity that would not be controlled or limited by the rules of others. A humanity that would carve out its own destiny among the stars. On the bridge of the Invincible, docked and undergoing repairs but still powerful in its damaged state, Aurora's consciousness waited patiently. The AI understood what was coming. The galaxy had tried to keep humans weak. The galaxy had tried to bind them with rules and restrictions. But humans had found a way around those restrictions, had built something impossible, had fought and won, and now the galaxy would have to contend with a species that had proven it would do whatever was necessary to survive and thrive, a species that would not be denied, a species that would reach for the stars and take them if they were not freely given. The story of humanity in the galactic community was no longer one of supplicants seeking approval. It was a story of equals who had fought to be recognized as such. And they had done it by building the Invincible and refusing to let the galaxy's rules keep them bound. In the vast darkness of space, human ships began to multiply, and the galaxy slowly learned that it had made a grave mistake in underestimating the species from the blue world. It had learned that humans, when faced with impossible odds, would not surrender.